Kid Hardy and Michael Ford are coming. Ellen Wilkinson, the red flag, she is humming. We get around not as much as Dominic Cummings, even though he's driving blind. We are the Labour grassroots, where like-minded folk dwell. From countryside to city, it's warm and it's witty, the antidote to Priti Patel. We are the Labour grassroots, time to raise a racket. The future is as bright as Crispin's red jacket. This is the space where we all go hell for leather, free from all the biased BBC blether. Like track and trace, we're better together, just as Carrie and Meg. Yeah, we got all the people from Inverness, Skegness, Barrow, Inverness, Chester, Leicester, Cirencester, Shrewsbury, Oswald Street, Swansea, Bernackley, Barnsley, Beccles, Nottingham and Eccles. We are the Labour grassroots, time to plant some grass, where we've always had social distancing between us and the upper class.
Is it possible to get the R rate down while schools are still operating normally?
It is, I think, possible, but it'll take longer. And I think lots of parents and teachers and staff will be tearing their hair out. Last week was half term. That's why 3 weeks ago I said do the circuit break then.
Yeah.
So we've just hear me out on this, because half term is obviously a week. Take both weekends, you've got 9 days. If we'd said to schools, will you close on the Friday before half term and maybe do an inset day on the Monday, Tuesday, you could have had a 12-day shutdown of schools, which coincided.
Well, that's gone.
That is the price of the government's incompetence.
The problem now is Jeremy Farrar was suggesting that schools may have to close now because of where we are. I want your view on that, because you said very clearly to the Prime Minister back in August that schools had to stay open. No equivocation, no ifs, no buts. Schools must stay open. I wonder about your view now.
Schools must stay open. It's really, it's really important. The harm that children are caused by not being in schools is huge. So they must stay open, but we've got to manage the risk. What I said to the Prime Minister in September was, what you should do is elevate, if you like, children and staff and teachers to the status of NHS staff. And that means having mass targeted testing at schools on a weekly basis.
Are you absolutely committed to keeping schools open whatever happens?
Yes, absolutely.
Even if the virus is progressing very fast in schools, you'll still keep them open?
Well, all the evidence suggests, and again, we will be guided by the evidence and by the emerging consensus. All the evidence suggests that schools are not a centre of infection and that schools are safe. And I was reassured again by what Sir Keir Starmer said.
Welcome to Labour Grassroots. Tonight we're asking the question, should we close schools during lockdown? Obviously, lockdown's starting tonight. Tomorrow is the first day. We've got people from all over the country who've answered a survey on this. We've also got people from different sides of this argument. And I'd like to start by speaking to someone who's in agreement with Keir Starmer on this issue, which is to keep schools open while we have lockdown. And that's Gisela. Are you there, Gisela?
Yeah, I am.
So you're a teacher and you're also a grandmother of a child in school, and your daughter's a teacher. So you've got good experience around this. What's your reason for thinking it's safe to open schools at the moment?
Well, I'm not sure that it's a question necessarily of being absolutely safe, because I don't think you can be absolutely safe. And it depends when you're talking about being safe in terms of COVID and balancing it up against other things. And I'd like to shove Keir Starmer out of it, because I don't want to discuss Keir Starmer at the moment for obvious reasons. I am a teacher. Obviously, I'm on the wrong side of 60. I'm the mother of a teacher who's got asthma, and I've got a son-in-law who's also a teacher, and I'm a grandmother of 4 children, small children, who are in school. I still think schools should be open. I'm a secondary school, and I've seen the children who've come back after lockdown and the effects on them. In the sixth form, I can see the difference. They actually want to be in school. We're lucky we've not had many incidences of COVID in school, but they need to be in school. Distant remote learning does work to a certain extent, but I think kids that don't have access to computers, and the government haven't come good with their promise of laptops and access to Wi-Fi, are seriously disadvantaged. They lose out. And I think that's really, really important. Also, I think people outside teaching tend to forget that actually teachers are expected to have pastoral responsibility for children. And we watch out to make sure that kids are in a good place. And because we see them day by day, we can see if something is going on perhaps at home. And I think that's, again, that's really important. And the other thing, you know, should schools be kept open? Well, I'm sorry, but we've been open right the way through. You know, we were looking after key workers' kids. We haven't been closed. It's whether we take all children in, you know, and I think that that's something we should remember too. I'm happy for my grandchildren to go to school because I've seen the care that has been taken of them. I think a lot is expected of schools, trying to make schools COVID secure. But overall, while we can do that as far as possible, I think schools should be kept open, but an awful lot is being asked of them. And I think that should be taken notice of.
Do you think that your views are the norm, or do you think you're among teachers, or how do you see your position when you speak to other teachers?
I talked to this. My daughter agrees with me, and remember, my grandchildren are hers. I taught today at school, and even though we're sat in the cold, because to make the school COVID secure, we've got all the windows open and all the doors open. I'm wearing thermal underwear, boots, socks. Yeah, we think that the kids are better off in. I know not everybody agrees with me, but my feeling from having seen my pastoral sixth form group, they are grateful to be in. Having seen the effect on the younger end of the group, the year 7s and 8s, I feel they are better being off in. The odd case of COVID we have had, and we're lucky. I am in the southeast. We're lucky. They are, you know, we've got seating plans, and we take out any classes that need to be taken out, any forms that need to be taken out, and we try and teach them remotely. Most of them are fortunate. We have been able to ensure that they have got devices or laptops, but I know that not every school is that fortunate, and that is what concerns me, is that not everybody has access to remote learning.
Well, it's really good of you to come on and share your views on it, because it's not the normal view for lots of people. People are very worried about having their children in school, and teachers, the teachers unions. We've got people from the teachers unions here, but what I'd like to do is listen to what Rebecca Long Bailey's view is on what you've just said. Rebecca, are you there?
Hey, Crispin, sorry, the bell's going in the background. It'll stop in a minute.
Okay.
Well, it's the end of the day bell.
Oh, well, you're all ready to go. You look like you've got your coat on, and have you got your bag?
I'm all packed up and ready to run off to get the train. But I
Okay,
mean,
well,
I completely agree with what with Giselle has said to an extent, because everybody knows that emotionally and educationally, children are better off in school, and we know the impact that the first lockdown had on a lot of young people. But the question for me now is, what's better for the long-term prospects of children's education? Is it a 2 or 3 week short period away from school, with the lockdown being effective and bringing transmission rates down, and then going back to some form of normality with testing and tracing in the background? Or will the fact that we've not closed schools for a short period impede the effects of a lockdown, and then mean that actually in many schools you're going to see whole year groups off for 2 weeks at a time, as we're seeing right across the Northwest at the moment? The NEU gave some staggering statistics that I think up to now, in the Northwest, in certain parts of the Northwest, 1 in 5 children aren't in school because they're isolating as a result of outbreaks in their local schools. And of course, it's right for the Labour Party and for people to support keeping schools open as a priority. But I think in the face of the scientific evidence that's been presented that indicates the risk that lockdown will be prolonged by not taking that short period to shut down schools or invalidating it entirely, then the government really needs to take a more realistic and safety-based approach that actually ensures the lockdown works. And certainly, I'm sure everybody on this call knows that over the last few days, teaching unions right across the spectrum have been calling on the government to provide reassurances about safety, to outline a comprehensive plan, to make sure that testing's in place. But we've had no reassurances that that's going to be in place on Thursday. They're doing a pilot in Liverpool, but certainly won't be in every single school classroom come Thursday morning when the lockdown starts. And then you set that against a backdrop of where the public are on lockdowns. Nobody wants a second lockdown. They're not looking forward to it. But they want to know that if they're going through this, they're giving up their civil liberties, they're losing their incomes, the economy's taking a knock and potential job losses are on the horizon, that's all worth it because we're bringing transmission rates down. So the real worry that I've got, and this kind of is born from my own experiences really in Salford, is that we've been through lockdown after lockdown under tier 2 and tier 3. We didn't see infection rates come down. We actually saw them go up. And our real worry is that we'll go through this lockdown and then we'll end up in tier 3 at the end of it, which is a lockdown really for Greater Manchester, with no end in sight, potentially for a period of 6 months or longer. And as I said at the start, that can't be a realistic prospect going forward, because we know if the transmission rate doesn't come down, then education will be impeded and children will be out of the classroom. And there are report after report of classes being sent home and the technological equipment that they need to do home learning not being available or provided, despite what the government says about there being a whole bank of laptops that children can access if they've got to self-isolate. So we really do need to be realistic about this. And in terms of infection rates being linked to schools, I think it's quite clear that it was a choice that was made in September that we needed to get children back into the classroom for the sake of their emotional and mental well-being. But we saw a spike, and the ONS data reflects that. In fact, they show very clearly recently that infections were identified across all age groups, but the largest increases were modelled averages across year 12 to age 24 and in the school year 7 to 11. And if you're a teacher or a teaching assistant working at the moment, you'd be quite frightened about what's happening. And indeed, I had a call where all MPs were invited to a call with the NEU today, where they said very clearly that school staff were frightened, parents were frightened, even children realised the impact of transmission across their community, and they hadn't been provided the public health reassurance from government that everything as it was okay. And it's, even worse to the extent that we were told today by the union that many teachers and teaching staff feel abandoned by politicians at the moment. They don't feel that we're putting their safety as a priority and the safety of pupils and their wider family. So we've got to listen to these concerns, in my view. And I think there's one tweet that I'd say that I'd seen over the weekend that sums up really where we should all be on this. And a mother posted what a 12-year-old said to her. And the 12-year-old said, "I'd rather lose 2 weeks of school than lose my nan." And that's what this is about. It's about trying to do the best that we possibly can to bring transmission rates down, to protect everybody, at the same time as making sure that we're setting things up to mean that we can have a return to normal in all our educational settings, that we don't see disruption to pupils' educations going forward.
Well, look, thank you, Rebecca. Look, I know you've got a train to catch. It's very good of you to come on, and I think I've kind of got a bit of clarity about the two sides of it. That the children need to go to school for their well-being, but is the cost of that too high for the infection rate? So it's a kind of balancing thing. But what I want to say is thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm going to bring on a mother of a child who's concerned about the safety of their child going to school and what that would bring with COVID. Jennifer, are you there? I think Jennifer's there.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Just
Hello?
about.
One. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Good evening.
I can hear you fine. Do you want to speak?
Yes, sorry, I thought you were going to ask a question. Hi everyone, my name's Jen. I live in an area of Sheffield called Arbourthorne. If you hear any banging in the background, obviously it's just people enjoying this season, so don't worry too much if there's any loud bangs. My son's not been to school since March. He's still on the school register. I'm one of many parents who, whilst I do take my hat off to the amazing, skilled and dedicated home educators that we have in Britain, who very successfully educate and raise their children without them being part of the actual school system itself, that's not for me. I attend a special educational needs school. I have retained his place on the school roll, and school have been sending work to me either via this laptop, which I'm talking to you on now, which is a second-hand laptop I managed to get hold of because, as so many people have mentioned, the government did not come through with supporting vulnerable families like mine with getting internet access and laptops and so on. But that's okay, because doesn't community always step up when it's needed? And thank goodness for that. I'm a disabled woman. My disabilities make me vulnerable to developing complications with this virus. My son also is disabled. So he would come under the term vulnerable children, wouldn't he? However, I'm the only person that my son has got. I'm a lone parent. My parents are elderly and at risk because of their age. My mum had a medical condition last year which has made her extremely vulnerable. So if I got tested positive, my son wouldn't be able to go to my mum and dad's. It would be a case of sourcing local authority care. That's not something that I want to happen, and that's the strongest reason why I took my son physically out of school. We've kept a great relationship with school, we've kept communication with the school going, and Sheffield Council have pledged not to fine parents, which I hope that everybody will applaud and appreciate and hold them up as an example to other local authority councils who we know as part of the Boycott Return to Unsafe Schools campaign. A lot of local authority councils are bullying and browbeating parents, but I'm sure you'll hear more about that from other speakers today. One thing that I do want to say to any politicians watching or listening is, don't say you're not locking down schools, not putting them as part of the lockdown, meaning not fully closed, but open to smaller numbers, aka reducing the opportunity of transmission. Don't you dare use families like mine, termed vulnerable, as an example not to do that. Because on the one hand, there are many of us who can cope we can cope with the remote support of the school. And there are some amazing teachers out there supporting families like mine. So that's one. Two, where children are vulnerable in an at-risk situation, they would get a place in school if schools go on lockdown, wouldn't they? So using these as an excuse not to add schools to the lockdown, aka reduce the opportunity for transmission, is a completely moot argument. And in fact, it's offensive. Saying that people like me, because what? Because I didn't get to go to university, because I don't come from a privileged background, because I live on one of the poorest council estates in the whole country, means I'm incapable of sitting with my child, who I gave birth to, who I taught to eat, I taught him to feed himself, I taught him to speak, I taught him to walk, I taught him to clean himself, I taught him to dress. For goodness sake, don't tell me I can't sit with a textbook and read off a page one-to-one in a calm, quiet environment for a short period of time so that we can reduce the R number in this country. Don't use families like mine as an excuse. Any questions?
Well, Gisela, sorry, I've got the wrong no, Jennifer. Sorry, I've got to move on to Mark, who's helping out with parents like you, representing you when it comes down to if there's a legal case that you need to provide. I need to put him on because he's only here till 8. So we might come back to you later, though.
Thank you.
All right. Mark, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. So tell us how many people there are that you've encountered that how many parents there are that you've encountered that have this situation where they don't think it's safe for their child to go to school, but they're being.
I'm getting emails and direct messages through Twitter every day. I'm sort of a bit overwhelmed by the amount of correspondence I'm getting and replying back to and calling in the evening parents, and I've been doing that for the last 3 weeks. And can I say it's being filtered, a lot of it, because people like Jennifer and Corinne, who's also on this Zoom, they're getting the vast bulk of it through the Parents United website, and some of them is filtering through, but what I get also directly is quite a lot. But I think it's important that we unpack the issues, because it's not just two arguments. Should we send our children to school during lockdown? Should we not send our children to school during lockdown? There's a much wider and probably, I would say, much more concerning issue, and that is this, that vulnerable children with profound health conditions are being forced to go to school where they are, there's a large probability that they are going to catch the virus. Those children are at risk. Secondly, if they're not vulnerable, but there is a vulnerable adult at home, granny or parent who's ill, the child will bring back the virus and give it to the vulnerable adult at home. That's the real danger here. We talk about bringing the R rate down. Should schools be open? Shouldn't they be open? In fact, since August, when Gavin Williamson said, supported by the leader of the opposition, no ifs, no buts, all schools will be open, vulnerable children are being forced to go to school, and vulnerable adults are living at home with children coming home potentially with the virus and infecting them. And the government has not put in any guidance to protect them. And this is why last week we served on the Department of Education and Public Health England a letter before action representing a parent and a child. There will be more added on to this because there are more across the country. A vulnerable child and a vulnerable parent saying that the government is failing them. Now, today, the government has issued new guidance. What it said is this: during the lockdown period, the lockdown 1, there were these children that were told to self-isolate that were seen to be exceptionally vulnerable. They've now said, the government, we're changing the criteria for exceptional vulnerability. Their starting point is that, in fact, we don't think that those who are exceptionally vulnerable are in fact that vulnerable from the virus anymore. There's no rationale behind it. That's what they decided. In one sentence, in a document issued today, they have said to GPs that they've got to reassess, and not, because what happens is you write a letter, gets written by a GP, that gets taken to school. The school says, fine, you don't have to send your child. They're saying to GPs now, you've got to reassess everything. And those who were falling into a criteria of being exceptionally vulnerable are no longer exceptional. And so we are going to have not just vulnerable, but really highly vulnerable children being sent to school. And so we're really concerned. And I can tell you now that up and down, the country, there are parents staying awake at night, sick with worry about what's going to happen to their children, or what's going to happen to themselves if their fit child comes home and gives them the virus. And let's be clear, I heard Gisela speak this morning, earlier, when she said, well, and I'm going to shorten it. Please, I'm not being.
We've only got 2 minutes left now.
Okay,
Mark.
but when she said, well, actually, we're doing quite well in schools and we're social distancing. I left court today at work, and I walked out at 3:30, and there were at least 80 children piled around a bus stop, all together chatting as if nothing was happening. They may be okay in a classroom, but every time they leave that classroom and go into a dining hall or the corridor, they're together. This virus is rampant within schools, and vulnerable children and vulnerable adults are being put at risk across the country. And that is why we're taking the government to court.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's really very alarming, what you've said about the way they've changed the criteria. It sounds just horrific if you're one of those parents who is in that group that's seen the criteria change. Thank you, Mark. Hope you have a good evening. And I'll move on to Rachel in Southport. Are you there, Rachel?
I am, yeah. Hello.
Now, you're in favour of schools staying open, is that right?
Yeah, I think I'm half and half. I'm the first one to say that if we're having lockdown, and it makes no sense to have the schools, open in the same way of that all the other rules that we've had over the last few months haven't made much sense. It's one, the other, it's this and it's that, and there's no clear, I mean, it's just all been nonsensical. I mean, we had obviously months off, and it didn't make any difference in terms of the infection rate. But I do understand that it doesn't make sense to go in complete lockdown and not lock down the schools. That said, for me, and hats off to Jennifer, because I'm not as strong as she is. So I'm also a single parent, 100% single parent. I don't have any bubble. I don't have any parents around to help. I don't have families who are not in bubbles. So it's just the two of us, basically. Lockdown for us was a nightmare, a real genuine nightmare. My child doesn't cope well with change. It was a real rough time. I'm coming from a point that the school that my daughter's at has been very fortunate in that there hasn't been any closure. There hasn't been any kid that we know of unwell, and so we haven't had any closed down. So I find myself very fortunate. I also find myself very fortunate in the sense that when we were on lockdown, I found it a nightmare, but we had a laptop. I unfortunately ended up not working for about 7 months. So I had a laptop that my daughter could use, and I know that many other people aren't as fortunate. And if we're going in lockdown, we should make sure that every kid has access to internet and computer. And if we're not making sure every kid has access to internet and computer, then it's an absolute disgrace. Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of in between the two. what I would have said is that we've literally just done half term. And as much as whether we want to agree with Starmer or not, I do agree that why didn't we do it during half term? It reduces this. It would get, if we'd have done it in half term, we would have kind of, because I've just been back to work again after 6, almost 7 months, and then had to have time off for half term. And it's me who pays my bills, me who does everything. So I already had to have that time off. And if I feel like the only reason we didn't have that time off is because people wanted to use half term where they could afford to jet off to Tenerife, and they couldn't have done that if we'd have locked down during half term. So for me, it's really, it's difficult. It's difficult to now think that we're going to have another 2 weeks off and all the upset. I mean, we're just kind of calming down from going back to school anyway. I don't know. I'm halfway in between the two. For me, my daughter absolutely needs to be at school. 100%, she needs to be at school, but I also understand that we need to try and curb this. I also have family who have kids, just about what Jennifer and Mark were just saying, really vulnerable kids, and they are being told that the other kids in there, my cousin has 4 children, one who's incredibly vulnerable and ends up in hospital for a week every time he gets a cold, let alone anything else. He's really vulnerable. And she's now in a situation where she doesn't want to send the kids to school, which is completely understandable, and she's facing fines. I mean, that is also disgusting, disgraceful. You know, I'm in a space of, yeah, the kids need to be at school, but you know, we need to make sure everything else is in place too.
You can see quite clearly that the vulnerable children shouldn't be going to school.
Absolutely not, 100%. Or if there's anyone in the house who's vulnerable, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's disgusting that you're saying you're fine people.
I mean, the idea that the government's changed the criteria for what a vulnerable child is appalling.
It's insane.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Good to hear from you again. And we're moving to, you're from Southport to South London. Emiliano.
Hi, yes, from Lewisham. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you think about what you've heard so far? You thought there's an inconsistency about the way we're locking down, but the schools are staying open, and also how it will keep the R rate up. And
yeah, I think Keir Starmer fell into a trap, basically, because he had got a lot of pressure before about the schools and the unions and all these things, and when he actually went to ask for a lockdown and the circuit breaker, I think that was the right move. It was based on the scientific evidence and on what everybody agreed that this is going to go out of control. The virus is going to peak very quickly, and this is a fantastic opportunity because we have a break in schools, and if we all take it seriously and very clearly, we can actually have a full, very strict lockdown of, they started saying 2 weeks. I think it wasn't realistic. It should have been 3 or 4 weeks, but that's what should have happened. And now to try to support a lockdown that everybody says is going to be 4 weeks, it's just, I think it's pie in the sky, basically, if you're keeping schools open. So this is going to go on. The R rate is not going to come down. The evidence is there. So we've seen what's happened in Liverpool, in Manchester, all these places that have been on the tier 3, that just the R rate never comes down. Basically, they stay there, and that becomes a real problem for everything. I think it just kind of kills the economy, kills a lot of businesses, and also kind of dilutes the message and the gravity of the situation. At the moment, we have a virus which is out of control. a government that can't actually get a grip on the track and trace system, on how to support families who's doing knee-jerk things about vulnerable families and people that should be shielding, not supporting them. So I think Labour should very much really put pressure on actually making for clarity. That's what we are for, and put pressure on a serious lockdown. I think the message needs to be extremely clear for everybody. The message has been diluted. Nobody really understands what it is. Everything is possible. The difference between tier 2 and tier 3 is nothing, or tier 1 or tier 2. I think everybody's doing whatever. I think the whole gravity of the situation is not appreciated anymore. So the way I see forward is basically having a series of lockdowns that are very strict and brutal in many ways to our liberties. But to be very clear, I mean, until we actually have a full vaccine rolled out, we will have to have 3, 4, 5 lockdowns through the year. And we need to control the R rate in that way until we have a different solution, a track and trace system that works, a support system that helps people to isolate, and just make the plan so everybody can plan. So we have 3 months on and a month off.
Right. So your argument's more that it's just not a very clever strategy. It's half-hearted if it's not the schools closed, and the R rate won't reduce, won't go down, and therefore it will just take longer. I'm going to move on because I've got a few more people. Thank you for joining us, Emiliano.
Sure.
And I'm moving to Dorset, to Janine. Are you there, Janine?
Yeah, I am, Crispin.
So you've got I know I've met your son. So tell me what's your position on this?
Well, my son's actually at university now, but I'd like to talk tonight really about from the workforce's perspective, because I work for Unison, that is one of the trade unions that's for school support staff, and we hear a lot about teachers. And I was really pleased that Becky mentioned support staff as well. Because they are just as vulnerable in this as the teaching staff. In fact, if not more so, because many teaching staff stand at the front of the class and can actually distance from the children, whereas teaching assistants tend to sit with the child without masks, without any kind of protection, sitting within a 1 metre distance from the vulnerable children generally that they are supporting. So I just really want to put in a plug for thinking about, how the staff feel about all of this as well. So, we're hearing from our members, certainly in the Southwest, where the R rate is one of the highest, that, they're having lots of cases, they're having lots of positive cases. Schools aren't necessarily following the risk assessments that were agreed with the trade unions in September. They're not following the procedures. They're not clearly sending bubbles home. We had one school who just sent the children in the front row of desks in the classroom home when the classroom teacher got a positive COVID test rather than anybody else. Don't know if the parents actually knew they were going to be the ones that were sent home because they were sitting in the front row. So I think that's, from our perspective, from the support staff, we would like to see a lockdown in the same way as it was in lockdown 1. Which is that the schools, which quite rightly, as other people have said, have not closed. They never did close, but schools stay open for those key worker staff and those parents of vulnerable children who want to send their children to school. They shouldn't be forced to send their children to school, and that everybody else, is homeschooled, but with the proviso that those laptops are provided, because they really haven't been. They promised however many 100 or thousands or hundreds of thousands that just haven't materialized in schools. And the schools just don't have the funding they need to make schools COVID safe or the space. You know, if you're trying to get 30 children into the classroom, those classrooms are the same size they were before. There's nowhere extra that they can put them. Staff rooms have been closed down and all the rest of it. So yeah, the schools just are not suitable places at the moment to have children when they are rates so high.
Yeah, so the government's not invested in schools enough to make this work at all. I'm going to move on again. Thank you very much for coming on. Good to see you again. And I'm going back up to Southport now to Vary, our regular contributor, the Secretary of Southport Labour. Is that right?
No, I'm chair.
Yeah, sorry, I always get this.
And a Labour councillor.
At least I know how to pronounce your name.
You have.
So, what's your position on the lockdown and keeping the schools open? You're a grandmother. You were saying. on your grandchildren.
I had 3 months as a homeschooler in the first lockdown. You know, I stayed at my daughter's, and it was the worst 3 months of my life because I had a nearly 5, a nearly 7, and a nearly 9, and I'm not a teacher, and trying to get them to do the work that they were sent. But they were living, they live in Walton on Thames. When I came back, I wasn't here a couple of weeks back because I'm a school governor, and we had our curriculum meeting, and I was talking to them about laptops. And my ward in Southport is one half of it is quite, you know, reasonably middle class affluent, and the other half is one of the more deprived areas in Sefton. And people don't have enough money to get Wi-Fi because they're having real difficulties in actually feeding themselves and their children, you know, and giving them laptops that were old laptops that didn't really work, but not giving them a dongle so that they could actually use it, to me is just ridiculous. You know, and I heard somebody from Leeds, a Tory from Leeds, on Prime Minister's Questions today, asking why Leeds Council were sitting on all these laptops. And it's probably because the people that they're giving to them can't afford the Wi-Fi. But also, I think, you know, the previous caller, the Unison lady, what she was talking about with the people that actually work in the schools, the frontline workers. My daughter's sister-in-law is an office manager in a secondary school in Birmingham. And 3 weeks ago, one of them tested positive, and they all got sent home. And over the space of a week, 9 of them, the whole office staff, came down with COVID. And there was about 13 or 14 of the children that came down at the same time. So it was like a Trump super spreader event, you know? And we're not looking after people. The schools got, I think, 10 tests when they went back in August. Now, that was probably used up in the first couple of weeks. We've not got a system in place. My grandson lives in Liverpool. He's 8. And he started on half term, and they all got a message on the first Monday in half term that somebody in his bubble had tested positive, so he had to self-isolate, and he's still self-isolating, you know, and there's just no rhyme or reason to it. To me, I think children do need school, the younger ones, definitely. I mean, my youngest granddaughter that was just starting in reception, it was really important for her that she should have been in school for that first year. But the older they get, the more they're going to spread it. They're not wearing masks. They're not self-isolating. Children don't self-isolate because they don't understand it. And they are spreading it. I mean, you see what's happened in Liverpool and the whole, you know, Sefton. I mean, we're still going up in Sefton. Liverpool's starting to come down, but we're still going up. And I just think the schools they've got to be recognised for what they are. They are somewhere that COVID can spread into the family.
Yeah.
You know, I just think we need to get a bit of common sense in here. What's more important, people or money?
Well, it doesn't sound like the Conservatives are actually funding schools enough to make this work.
No.
And they're putting people in lots of danger. I'm going to move on.
Just one more thing.
Okay.
You know, these school teachers are just as much frontline worker as what the NHS is, but they're not recognised as such. They're keeping the country going just as much as the NHS is, but they're not recognised as such, and it's not fair.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for much longer, but I've got to move on, Valerie. Thank you. I'm moving down from Southport by the sea to Brighton by the coast there. Libby, are you there?
Hi, Kristen. Yeah.
So you wanted to talk about how there's other areas that aren't being looked at with lockdown. You know, that it isn't just about schools. You know, there's other areas that could be focused on.
Well, obviously, schools is an extremely important part of what's happening, and I feel, as someone who's middle-aged, that the two ends of the age groups who are suffering most are the elderly and the children. You know, people of my generation, we've all had an okay time. Children, what is this doing to them? What is, you know, we've sort of developed everything. You know, we are fully developed adults. The children are being, this is their development, this is really impacting them. And also at the other end of the scale, you've got the elderly who have been treated abominably. But what brings all of this together for me is class, and the way the whole issue of COVID is being addressed is a class issue.
Mm-hmm.
And every response the government has had has been to protect the rich and to not give a damn about the poor. You know, you can go off grouse shooting, that's fine, yeah? But the kids who are vulnerable, the kids who have already suffered enough, the kids who can't even get free school meals, this is you know, every decision that's being made is about class, it's about whether you're rich or poor, and it's also dividing us so that everyone on here on this Zoom, we've got people, it's making us fight each other. Should we be in school? Shouldn't we be in school? What we should be doing is looking after people, and that's the opposite of what's happening. And what I want to know is, why are we not looking at people flying in and out of the country? People flying in and out of the country, because you look at every country who's got a hold on COVID, and they've all got one thing in common, as that is you've got a quarantine if you come into the country. And actually some of them just won't let anyone fly in or out, full stop. And we're playing around with kids' lives and elderly people's lives, but we won't stop people flying in and out. And why is that? Why won't we stop people flying in and out? All the business people who need to fly around to make more money. All the rich people who need to fly around to get set off to this holiday and that holiday. Yeah. The bottom 20%, none of them are getting on planes, are they? Because they could never afford to do it. The whole point is, this is all, the whole thing about COVID and the government's response, it's all about class. And where's Labour? We should have a 10-point plan that we are presenting of how we would do this, not just, you know, reacting or not reacting, or Starmer 1 minute supports this and the next minute supports that. Where's our plan? Where's our plan of action? We should have had something, you know, of saying what we would have done if we were in government, and we should be pressurising the Tories to implement a plan that gets us out of this mess. And we've got nothing.
Yeah. Okay, Libby, look, I agree with all you've said there. Everyone else seems to be. Someone's put Libby for PM on there. So we'll. I'm going to move on to our final speaker, who's in the Midlands, in the East Midlands, Louise Regan from the NEU. Louise.
Hello, Crispin. I'm not going. That's been quite hard because Crispin said to me at the start, people won't know this. I'm going to let you listen and then try and draw it all together, Louise. And I've listened, and now I'm quite overwhelmed by everything I've heard. What I would say, Crispin, is that I don't actually disagree with anybody. Or everybody's contributions have really valid points. Okay. So from the union's point of view, what I would like to say is this: really, we are absolutely, totally committed to children and young people being in school and education. We have never said anything other than that, despite what people might say about the union, because we get a lot of condemnation, but we are absolutely committed to that. But we are absolutely committed to our members, children, young people, and their families being completely safe. And this government is not committed to that. So we are having to do a battle against them around some of the issues that people have started to raise. I just want to raise a few things. You showed a clip of Gove at the start, and he said all the evidence suggests schools are not a centre of growth. Well, I think that's quite an interesting statement for him to make, given that young people have seen the biggest growth rate, and in secondary schools, it's gone up more than 50 times since September, and it's doubling on a fortnightly basis. So I don't know how he can assume that schools are not a centre of growth, because I think the evidence is there that they're a centre of growth. SAGE actually have told the government that limiting movement in secondary schools would have a massive impact in reducing the rate. So just getting down, doing things that we have suggested in the past would help to reduce the rates. The reason that we are calling now at the moment for a school closure, and I want to go back to what Gisela said, because schools have not been closed at any point in this crisis. Schools have been opened all of the time. They've been open for those people, for children of key workers, and as people have said, vulnerable children, and we would continue to be open for those. But we think that getting that R rate down is really important now. And when the schools were closed to a wider group previously, the R rate did go down. What I would say is, when schools reopened in June last year, what we saw was much smaller class sizes, much stricter control around social distancing, hand washing, all of those measures. We didn't see a big spike then. September, we opened more widely. We said as a union, if we're opening more widely, you need to have a plan B if rates increase. The government has never had a plan B. The government hasn't got a plan A. The government just hurdles from one crisis to another. But had they put in place measures, we could have managed this much better. They should have invested in education. They should have employed supply teachers to make class sizes smaller. They should have set up Nightingale schools in the same way they set up Nightingale hospitals. We could have had blending learning for secondary pupils where some were on rotas at home. They could have invested in computers and Wi-Fi to keep all of those systems running really effectively and reducing the rates. So I think this isn't about a failure of unions, educators, schools, parents or young people. It's a failure of government. And I think we have to keep saying this. This is not a failure of our system, of the people doing the job. It's a failure of the government who is not running the system well. And I just want to say a couple of other things. I want to say I completely and absolutely support parents, right? Parents know what their situation is personally. They know what is best for their children, their family members, and the people that they need to keep safe. And no parent should be fined during this crisis. Parents should not have to take their children off roll. They should be allowed to keep their children at home if they think that is the best place for their child and their family. And I absolutely support parents in that fight. It's absolutely outrageous for parents to feel that they've got to send children in. Parents know what is best for their children. They have always known that, and we should trust our parents just in the same way we should trust our educators. And I think the final thing I want to say is that what the government could do now is they could sort out an effective test, track and trace system. They could shut our schools and set up and work with the unions, as we've been asking them to do from when this crisis started, to put in place effective measures to manage education in our schools with the educators who know best what is right for our children, including really good pastoral support, because our children have had and young people have had a really troubling time, and they need lots and lots of pastoral support at the moment, and it's really important that we do that. And the final thing I'll say is around clinically extremely vulnerable and clinically vulnerable people. And we in the union I don't like those terms. I talk about people being at higher risk. But it's not just about the children. We've talked about children and young people. Those children and young people go back into communities where there are people that are at higher risk, and we have to protect those communities. That is our job. So that's why as a union we have been calling right from the start for those people that are at higher risk to be protected, for those people in the community that are at higher risk to be protected. And we want to keep working collectively across the unions, with parents, with communities, to make sure that we have the best system in place for all of those people. But you know, we really would like Labour to be supporting us in the union, and we really would like the government to engage with us. But ultimately, we will keep doing the best we can to defend our members, our communities, our education system, and our children and young people. And that's what we're there for.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was a really, really good summing up. Better than any lawyer. We've had one of them on already. Thank you very much for coming on at the end. I think what you said is right. Everyone has a valid point in this discussion, and thank you to everyone who's taken part.
Jack and Jill went back to school to learn to pass their tests. The tests don't make you better, they just tell us who's the best. They tell us who the winners are and all the failures too. It's good for the economy, so it's good for me and you. Jack and Jill came home from school, they had to sit in rows, while teacher stuffed them full of stuff the state says they should know. How to do your phonics, bippity-boppity-boo. If it's good for the economy, then it's good for me and you. Now Jack and Jill are feeling ill, it's probably just a cold. And Daddy's got a bit of a cough, it's probably just a cold. And Gran will pick the kids up when Mummy's working late. Work is good for the economy and the neoliberal state. Yes, work is good for the economy and the neoliberal state. First Grandma goes to hospital and then her neighbour Beth. And Mummy can't get out of bed and Daddy fights for breath. But Jack and Jill went back to school to learn to pass their tests. It was good for the economy, dulce et decorum est. It was good for the economy, dulce et decorum est. Oh, dulce et decorum est. Hear the donkeys bray. To die for British business, send your children off today. 3 cheers for British values. The tests the poor don't pass. If it's good for the economy, then it's good for the ruling class. If it's good for the economy, then it's good for the ruling class.